recorded on Thursday afternoon with Christian Pina of Gambling Podcast, our UFC writer for UFC Fight Night 144 in Fortaleza, Brazil. We talked about the main card matchups. We also talked about his favorite picks on the prelim card. So here is that segment with Christian Pina of Gambling Podcast and BangTheBook.com. All right, I'm joined now by Christian Pina from Gambling Podcast. He is our UFC writer at BangTheBook.com. We're going to chat about UFC Fight Night 144. This one comes your way from Fortaleza, Brazil this weekend. Christian, how's it going today, man?
Good, man. It's a beautiful time to be out in Las Vegas and in the desert with Super Bowl week upcoming. And more importantly, for these purposes, the UFC out in Fortaleza, Brazil, and coming off, a really good event. I'm so happy that I was able to start kind of this partnership off on the right foot. A couple great things coming into play. The Paige Van Zandt play really, no sweat there. The under on Dillashaw fight. So, it's one of 50 or 40 events. So we have 39 more to go. But always good to start off the right foot and look to keep it going with the process and everything.
Yeah, and you did a phenomenal job breaking down that last event, both at BangTheBook.com and here on the podcast. Very, very in-depth research. You're one of my most respected UFC guys out there in the marketplace, so very, very fortunate to have you at BangTheBook.com, and definitely looking forward to chatting with you here as we go throughout the year. So let's go ahead and tackle the main event here for this card first. Raphael Assuncao, Marlon Moraes. You mentioned on the previous podcast that we did that when there's a rematch between two guys, you really like having that data point. You like having, that frame of reference. Do you feel like that plays into the handicap here?
Absolutely. And again, for anyone that missed that last one, rematches in UFC are one of my favorite types of fights to handicap in that it eliminates so many of the variables. And so when you're starting out, looking to handicap UFC, when you're looking at stylistically how two fighters that have never fought before match up, you effectively have to pick one opponent that has fought the other's, style and who mirrors that when you look at how stylistically two fighters will match up. And so when you have that, pure nobody can emulate one fighter like themselves, right? So you have that ability to really kind of eliminate a ton of variables on how somebody will respond to a certain type of style. And so it just makes the handicap, I don't want to say easier, but just eliminates variables and makes it a little bit different. And so for this type of fight, the Assuncao really has been criminally underrated, and it's really been for a variety of reasons. The biggest one is he doesn't really have a fan-friendly type of style. He is a counter puncher through and through. He's not going to have the flashy knockout, nothing like that. He's not going to, most of the time have a flashy submission, maybe a rear naked here or there. But at the end of the day, you look up and he's cleared through the top 15 of the division, and he's still here. And just, it's one of those things where the UFC, when they're not behind somebody, these type of things happen. You have guys that are underrated. It's just the type of fan that the UFC is looking to attract, doesn't have, isn't going to love Assuncao style. And maybe the same thing could be said for Moraes, obviously much more knockout power. But this fight is really kind of, in terms of path to victories, really cut and dry to me. The path for victory for Moraes is a knockout and one that's preferably early. The same type of thing could be said for Assuncao, which is going to be most likely a decision victory. And so when you look at the last fight with what happened, it was a 3-round fight. It was in Brazil last time as well. This one being a 5-round fight in the title. So not many things have changed here. It's just, the 2 extra rounds in Brazil is the same exact thing. Not many people are able to win a decision against a guy like Raphael Assuncao. He just counters everything and refuses to take damage. Absolutely incredible what he's been able to do in kind of that slick style of not taking damage and just letting them come to him and counter punching. It's absolutely incredible to see what he's been able to do with so little respect from, fans in the UFC alike. But at the end of the day, this is a fight that's already happened, and it's very cut and dry. Not to sound repetitive, it's a early knockout for a guy like Moraes or a decision victory. And so at the price, knockout or submission, that type of thing is all variance. And so if in a perfect world, if two people sat there, that's why I always kind of lean towards, quote unquote unders in the, in football. Variance, offense is variance. Same thing with baseball. If these two guys sat there and they ran the clock, it would be a decision. And so betting on a knockout can be a little bit of a sketchy situation for anyone that bets heavyweight fights. They absolutely know that. So definitely think this price is a little bit unfair for Assuncao at plus 145. Definitely a dog or pass situation.
Now, here's my question. As somebody who's not as well versed in the UFC as you are, Assuncao won this first one, albeit by split decision, but he did win that first fight. What's changed that, would make him a plus 145 dog here? I mean, is it just, as you mentioned, the optics of him as a fighter?
Well, I mean, this fight is lined pretty much the same exact place that it was the first time as well. And a lot of people do feel that Moraes won that fight. I kind of feel that Assuncao won rounds 1 and 3. I think that, again, as a betting favorite, people were, got burned by that. Not that the public has moved this line a ton. It's just the style and, the Moraes is a killer, right? And so I think that he does possess the knockout power. There's more paths to victory for Moraes than there is Assuncao. Assuncao's path is a decision victory. Moraes, in theory, could win a decision, but the knockout is definitely going to, if there is one, is definitely going to come from Moraes, and I would argue likely submission as well. So at the end of the day, there's just more paths to victory, although they're not probably the most likely in my eyes. It is hard to beat a fighter twice, but this fight has happened already, so I don't really understand the line either, truthfully.
So let me ask you about this then, Christian. I mean, you and I are both baseball guys. We know that the quant market moves lines. We know that the people that are modelers, the people that use the advanced statistics, they move lines. When you talk about football, college football, the NFL, talk about basketball, it's a little bit of a variety of the sharp segments of the market. Who moves UFC lines? I mean, how do these things, get bet into and start getting on the move?
Here's the thing. There's not odds makers in Las Vegas that truly their one job is to make UFC lines. The whole world basically goes off of one offshore site. And so as soon as they open, they take very low limits, basically $100 on some at first. Once the market kind of settles out, that's when Las Vegas will start hanging things. And you're talking, I mean, there's certain main events aside, you're looking at a $500 to $1,000 limit. And when those professional players come into these casinos and bet that, they're going to move the lines. It is 100% people instead of money that move these lines. If they have a sharp bettor with a seasoned record and a good reputation that they know they've been beat by, number one, their limits are going to be mine are basically 500 to 1,000 max on main events here, and some are lower than that on round props and stuff. So it, without a doubt, without question, it is people that move this. It's professionals, but their limits are kept very low within UFC. I mean, you can go around town picking off, a dime limit at every book in town to get what you need down, but the line is going to move throughout town as you do that. So without question, it's people more than money when it comes to UFC in Las Vegas.
All right, so we move on to the match right before the main event. Jose Aldo plus 120 here against Moicano, who's minus 140. This one in the featherweight division. The big question here is how far removed is Jose Aldo from what he used to be 2 or 3 years ago, and is it enough for him to actually pull this minor upset?
I mean, anytime you see dog money next to the great Jose Aldo, it sticks out to you as long as it's not against one Conor McGregor. Here's the deal, though. Shell of himself is not, fair for a guy like Aldo at this point. He's just a different fighter at this point of his career. He is basically a boxer at this stage. Moicano is an absolute killer at this point, the number one prospect in this division by far. He's also the tallest. He's definitely the biggest I've ever seen in this division. And so this is in Brazil. This is Aldo in Brazil, but Moicano is at the same time. And so the size advantage is without question. The reach is going to be the key to this fight. Look, Aldo has the power without question, and Moicano does not. Moicano is a point fighter. He is a volume fighter. He is going to look to keep this fight at distance and stick and move it and not get caught by Jose Aldo at this point. And as long as he can do that, which is, of course, a lot easier said than done. The size should be just too much here. And again, I've seen this narrative floated out here that, Aldo is likely to win round one. Moicano probably going to win the third because of the cardio problems that Aldo has without question shown in the past. And so it's likely to come down to that second round. And so if you can get, a 1-round fight, you should always take the underdog money here. I don't see that being necessarily the foregone conclusion. The longer this fight goes, it certainly is going to favor Moicano. So, a first round that is, I think this fight, if you do bet Moicano, is going to be a little hairy, especially, the first couple minutes of this fight should be the best that Jose Aldo looks. And as long as he can, quote unquote, weather that storm, being Moicano here, he should be able to keep this fight at distance and absolutely volume punch and kick everything to death for Jose Aldo. So really, Moicano is next level. He's been pegged as a future championship contender since he's really came into the UFC, and this is without question the biggest fight of his career, and I really do feel that he will get this job done. I mean, the over in this at 2.5 certainly does make some sense here. It is juiced at about minus 220, but that kind of shows you everything you need to know. I really think you're getting a little bit of a discount on a guy like Moicano in this situation. But you can never count out Jose Aldo, and so I do understand why this is a very closely lined fight, but it would definitely lean with the up-and-comer Moicano. Just too much volume, being able to stick and move, but has to avoid getting caught.
Well, and that's one of the things that we kind of touched on a little bit in our podcast segment a couple of weeks ago, where, again, the people that book and schedule these matches are not morons. You've got Moicano here, who is an up-and-comer, Aldo, who's a very high name recognition guy, but does appear to be on the downslope of his career. So, this is one of those name wins that would look good next to Moicano. The question is, does Aldo's, sort of, veteran know-how equalize the playing field here?
I mean, sure. Yeah, we talked about this last week as well, that though you can't count out veteran craftiness. At this stage of his career, though, there's no doubt he is a worse fighter than he was. I mean, that's just, Father Time is undefeated in the fight game just as much as any other sport in the world. Moicano is just, I believe, is going to be too much the size. When people who aren't maybe familiar with a guy like Renato Moicano, when they see him in that octagon next to a guy or even at weigh-ins, I think it's going to be really eye-opening here. And so you can never count out Aldo. That there's no doubt about that. He's shown that in his last fight. Moicano is just, I think he is too fresh, too young, too big. And as long as he has his head on straight with a good game plan of wanting to take this decision victory and not try to do too much, especially late, where he could leave himself vulnerable to that right hand of Aldo, even late with the cardio issues, this one should be a 29-28 Moicano decision.
You mentioned the weigh-in, and I want to ask you about market entry here from a UFC standpoint. Are you looking to play openers with these? Are you just looking to play them, as you get your research done? Or, does that weigh-in and how the fighters look, sort of put you over the top on making a play?
Well, here's the thing. There are two weigh-ins, and casual fans may not know this. There is a weigh-in that happens. So the ceremonial weigh-in, where they come out to their pre-fight shtick and all that, is usually on Fridays. The real weigh-ins are on Thursdays of fight week, and that's the one where you actually want to pay attention, see how someone looks, whether they're depleted on the scale, whether they look good, how they're looking, how they're feeling. And so when you see these guys at the ceremonial weigh-ins, they are nowhere near what they weighed the day before that. And so it's largely, a dog and pony show at that point. The real one is the day before that. And so once I have that kind of in my back pocket, I mean, if there's lines that to me look off or I want to take an initial position on, especially fights that are around picks. And there's one or two of those on this card as well. We look at a fight like Oliveira and Tamor and Junior Albini. Every time that you can get, a middle is the greatest thing in the world. And when I say middle here, and there's another one as well, Said Nurmagomedov versus Ricardo Ramos. I'll just use that one because that one did flip. Said Nurmagomedov was the favorite at the beginning, and now he's plus 105. So if you were able to get, a plus 120 on Ramos who is now minus 135, you come back on Said Nurmagomedov at plus 110. Now you're going into a fight with free money and you don't have to do anything. So fights that I foresee the public shifting lines at open going one way, or fights that are generally lined at a pick, will be the ones that I attack at open just to set up an initial position to be able to arbitrage it and come back on the other side.
That's interesting. I've always wondered about that with arbitrage because, I mean, like I said, I know that you're a baseball guy and I am as well. And, sometimes you get those arbitrage opportunities in Major League Baseball because, it's pretty easy to tell nowadays where those lines are going to move. So it is interesting to hear that that's part of your handicapping toolbox for UFC and something that you do utilize, I imagine, whenever you can.
Absolutely. And again, it's very noticeable when you have a big public guy. I mean, there's always notorious, the Russian money is always going to be on the Nurmagomedovs of the world. The Irish money is always going to be on, the Conor McGregors of the world and their teammates and stuff. So when you foresee that, it makes a very good opportunity. And like I said, fights that really open, a dead minus 110, minus 115 both ways. Whoever I foresee the line shifting towards, obviously I'm going to bet that other side so that I can come back on it. And again, with a fight like Said Nurmagomedov and Ricardo Ramos hold, effectively, 0.2 of free money and not have to lift a finger at that point as well.
We'll check on the Oliveira-Tamor fight in a minute. How about this Good and Maia fight here, the welterweight division? Maia's a pretty big favorite here, minus 180.
Yeah, and the narrative on Damian Maia has really shifted over his last three fights. I mean, he has looked old. He, is the narrative. He's not looked himself. When you really look at that, I mean, not only have those been against three of the best fighters or best wrestlers in the division, but three of the best, fighters all around. And so they've really just been the cream of the crop, and obviously showing that he's not really at that point to be able to, kind of take out the Woodleys of the world, the Covingtons of the world, that type of stuff. And so the narrative is almost floated a little bit too far, much like I talked about with Van Zandt the other week. It's just flow, it's market over correction, for lack of a better term. And so when you look at this, I actually don't think that this line is too far out of the realm of what it, should be. I think if, Maia had won any of those last fights, you may get, you probably would have seen this be even, up into the 200s and all that type of stuff. Look, Maia is the human backpack when he is at his best. He wants to take you down. He wants to take you down again and again, and he wants to lay on you. And so the key for any fighter when they're facing a guy like Damian Maia is their takedown defense. It's what you want to look at. Are they able to, stuff those, as you saw with the title fight with Maia and Woodley? Woodley was able to do that. It was such a good fight plan. It was absolutely incredible to watch. Lyman Good is not on the level, let's just say that, of those type of fighters. Again, Woodley, Covington, Kamaru Usman. So this one to me is pretty cut and dry with the favorite here. I think that Maia is going to get those takedowns, and he's going to lay there for 3 rounds. This is the script on when Damian Maia wins fights. This is, he does certainly gas out, as anyone would, working and laying on somebody for that long. And so, Lyman Good could, in theory, catch him late, anything like that. But at the end of the day, this is really simple here. Lyman can't stop a takedown. Maia's the best in the business at that, aside from, Woodley, Khabib, those type of guys. Maia by decision or Maia submission along the way, the most likely outcome here.
All right, so that Oliveira-Tamor fight, basically a coin flip. Minus 110 being dealt both ways over at DSI Sports. But again, as always, shop around for the best lines you can find in these UFC fights. What do you think about this coin flip here? I mean, do you feel like there's some value on one side or the other?
I mean, looking at this from a numbers perspective, if you're getting, plus money on either side of this, I think it makes some sense to take the underdog. This is a 50-50 fight here. Look, Charles Oliveira is the greatest submission fighter in mixed martial arts history, the most submission wins in the UFC. And so that's what he's going to look to do. He's going to look to put a jiu-jitsu clinic on the young up-and-coming prospect, David Tamor. And that's really it. Tamor, the thing about Tamor is, for a prospect, he has a great fight IQ. He makes so many little things look so easy that maybe the casual fan is not going to see. And Tamor certainly has the striking edge here. And when you look at Oliveira and what he's been able to do, I mean, really has gone through no adversity in his last fights. And I think that is something that's going to change in this fight. This is not going to be a walk in the park like the last few have been. And if David Tamor can strike, he's going to be able to, I think, get his way to a victory here. Here's the thing. If Tamor makes he has to fight a perfect fight, and that it takes a perfect fight game plan to be able to beat a guy like Oliveira. If he makes one mistake, if he throws something off balance, he is going to run the gauntlet of every submission that has ever come across, and maybe some you haven't even seen yet, in a mixed martial arts octagon. Oliveira is that good in the submission game. But I think that, stylistically, it takes a fighter with a great fight IQ to be able to beat a guy like this, and that's exactly what the prospect has, and what a name recognition win would be for David Tamor here.
All right, so as we look at the rest of the card here for this Fight Night event down in Fortaleza, Brazil, what are you looking at, man? Whether it's prelims or on the rest of the main card, what are some of your favorite plays for this weekend?
Yeah, let's head on down to Mara Borella and Tyler Santos. For anyone, I mean, this is probably one of the least recognized fights on the card for sure here. When we look at Santos right around minus 160, we'll come back on Borella plus 130. Santos, for anyone that doesn't know, is probably has some of the best jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai in the game. And it's going to be very interesting to watch, because Mara Borella definitely has I don't want to say name recognition, because I don't think people really spend too much time in this type of division and weight class, but certainly has fought the, better of opponents here. And so if when you really break this down, the there's no, I want to say there's the striking advantage is without question on Barella, but there's no knockout power at this weight class. And so it's going to be very interesting here. The Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu clinic that I feel that Santos is going to be able to put on here is going to be, possibly stopped along the way here, but a dominant 30-27 type of decision, very likely in the cards here for her there in that situation. Another one that I think makes, for betting purposes makes a ton of sense. Said Nurmagomedov and Ricardo Ramos. I just want to talk about this fight because it's 235 pounders here that are up and coming in the division, hot prospects. It's going to be an absolute war. And so from a casual fan perspective, not necessarily to bet this, there's not a ton on this card that I think is going to make the casual fan jump up and down and see that they want to fight. This fight, I do believe that. And obviously Said Nurmagomedov coming in with that famous last name of his cousin Khabib, it's going to be a lot closer. He doesn't fight like a typical Nurmagomedov. And for anyone that watches, the Khabibs of the world and everything, he's a lot more flashy. He's a lot more messy, a lot less controlled. And for this fight to be, effectively the second fight of the night, it probably should be a lot higher on this card in terms of excitement. And Ramos is very tested, comes out fast, usually slows down, starts giving out takedowns, which could be a little bit of an issue late. It's going to be a very good fight for the casual fan, I think, to keep their eye on for sure.
Now, I want to cycle back to Santos real quickly here because there's something that I'm curious about. She had that cameo appearance on Dana White's Contender Series, probably got herself, a contract here with that performance. Up until that point, 2-year layoff and didn't really fight in any fight circuits that a lot of people are familiar with. How much does that matter to you? Looking at the development path for these fighters.
Yeah, Santos is 15-0. Obviously making her UFC debut. Barella coming off close decision with Caitlin Chikagan. And more of anything, despite how good that I really think that Santos could be, Mara Barella is coming off a decision where Caitlin Chikagan landed 21 of 128 strikes and Chikagan won the fight. That tells you a lot about Mara Barella. Been knocked out by the dregs of the division. She's very chinny, does not want to strike. And so, yes, she is a black belt, but Santos definitely has, that private D1 coach for this type of fight. Barella is so timid, so afraid to strike, been knocked out 3 times. There's no place she feels safe in that UFC, and at times almost looks scared. Should put an absolute wrestling clinic. Again, Mara Barella is, the quintessential 500, less than 500 fighter, while Santos has a real shot to do some great things in this division. And I don't think you're ever going to see, until she starts fighting the top 10 and top 5s of the division, a price like this effectively past this debut, which I think is going to be dominant.
So, again, my question's sort of like, if you don't see people that have fought in maybe Bellator or M1 or, Jungle Fight or something like that, how much does that matter to you as these prospects are coming up the ranks?
It depends on the regional scene. And just because something isn't on Bellator or the UFC doesn't mean that there's not fight tapes out there of these guys on, the girls on these various regional scenes. You have to look at what the type of competition is and who they are fighting in that regional circuit. And again, I place a lot more emphasis on the fighter than the circuit that they're training out of. But there's, I've seen effectively, throwing the Ultimate Fighter aside for Santos, her regional stuff, I haven't seen, the type of Muay Thai clinic that she has been able to put on these girls out of a female in a very long time. And so it's definitely out there. You have to do some work. You have to look at, some grainy YouTube cell phone footage to be able to get that type of handicap. But it's certainly out there. If for anyone that's out there, if you Google, Tyler Santos regional fights, and I'm sure the last 10 will pop up, and that's kind of how you start.
Christian Pina, who's on Gambling Podcast and also our Bang the Book UFC writer. You can follow him on Twitter at Christian Pina, Pina. Man, great preview here for this weekend. Phenomenal breakdown here on the podcast, and definitely looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely, man. Let's keep it going.